Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we are going to be talking about the movie Mean Guns on DVD. So Mean Guns was made in 1997 and directed by Albert Pyun and written by Andrew Witham. And so the first time I saw this movie, it was after I had bought it over at a video store in Washington, D.C. And I remember it was just when I was getting into the B movie scene. And I remembered having heard a lot about Albert Pyun from the movie review website, which is unfortunately now defunct, called scifilm.org. That's where I first read about the movies The Sword and the Sorcerer and Cyborg. And I'd heard, and by reading about those, that kind of led me to look into some of his other movies just because they sounded intriguing. And Mean Guns was a title that popped up in several bits about Albert Pyun as, say, one of his more popular movies. And so when I saw this at the certain video store in DC, this was a long time ago, but I remember the video store clerk, I was asking him about it, and they're like, yeah, that was actually a pretty cool movie. And they were pretty upfront about it being a straight up B movie, but at the same time they said that it was actually pretty cool, even though it was a B movie. And so I bought it, and when I got back home, I watched it, and I remember it made a bit of an impression on me. And at the time, I did a review on it, and it was back when I was writing under the handle Real Ponderings on another now defunct website called epinions.com. And I remember I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. And so, seeing as how Albert Pyun had recently passed away, I'd been kind of on a bit of a kick, watching some of his movies, or I should say, rewatching some of his stuff. And I found that some of his movies are, or I should say, some of his movies have improved from in my viewing experience, and sometimes that's because they've been transferred to, say, something like Blu-ray, or other times, maybe my perspective's changed. But Mean Guns is definitely one of those movies that I think is, in a very strange way, it straddles the line between being a straight up B movie, I mean, a clearly low budget B movie, and on the other hand, though, depending on, say, one's love for B movies, it's also kind of a good movie. Now, don't get me wrong. If you were to compare it to, say, your mainstream, cinematic masterpiece, I mean, yes, this is going to pale immensely. But if you're into the B movie scene, Mean Guns is definitely something you should check out. And so basically, the story is concerning this criminal organization called the Syndicate, which has its reach all over the world, apparently, or at least to the point where certain parties are loyal to the Syndicate, and certain favors are called in to where, in this one particular city, they have this newly constructed prison, which is about to be dedicated, set up for them for this one specific event. I mean, prior to its dedication as an actual prison, wherein they invite 100 of their associates to gather at this place. And as the MC, Vincent Moon, tells them, all of them are there because they have wronged the Syndicate in some way. And basically, the Syndicate was initially going to rub them out of the picture, but instead of going out and tracking each one down and then executing them, they decided to get them all in one place and maybe give them a bit of a sporting chance by way of a gladiatorial match, namely by having confiscated all their weapons at the door. They then dump a bunch of guns, bullets, and baseball bats into the area, and basically everyone just scrabbles for whatever weapons they can find, and starts killing whoever's right next to them just to kind of stay alive. And so as the movie goes on, you see that there's more than a few complicated backstories that kind of factor into things. And there are kind of plans within plans. And you could argue that there's not a whole lot of development to the plot. I mean, because the plot is what it is. But at the same time, though, it's all about the presentation. And the presentation, makes a, fairly simple plot, nonetheless, a very atmospheric experience. Because, amongst other things, the soundtrack of the movie consists a lot of Mambo music, as well as an eerie synthesizer score by Anthony Ripparati, who frequently collaborates with Albert Pyun, or I should say, frequently collaborated with Albert Pyun since Pyun's no longer with us. But yeah, so you have this atmosphere that's sort of lends itself to the proceedings, to make a sort of surreal experience, because you have people, trying to kill each other, whether it be, shooting each other or bludgeoning each other to death with baseball bats or throwing knives at each other. And yet you've got this very strange music score. I mean, on one hand, the Mambo sounds very upbeat for a decidedly downbeat situation. And then on the other hand, though, when you have those rare moments of quiet, you have the somber instrumental score by Anthony Ripparati, which sort of lends itself to the scenes where certain characters get introspective. And so, speaking of the characters, that's another thing that kind of helps make the movie more interesting than it probably would be. I mean, because on one hand you have Ice-T as Vincent Moon, who is basically running things. I mean, he's not running the Syndicate, but for this particular occasion, he's in charge of things. And it's Ice-T, basically playing a bad guy, and he actually does a pretty good job at it. And yet, in some ways, he has a bit of charm to him, a very strange sort of underworld type charm. Because you get the idea that in some respects, he doesn't want to be there, but at the same time, or I should say, his character doesn't want to be there, because there's at least one or two other people that he's not wanting to have killed, but because he's got his orders, he's kind of like, hey, you're all in on this, you're all fair game. But then on the other hand, though, you have those moments where, he kind of gets caught up in things and decides to take part in, killing some of the, former Syndicate henchman himself. And so, Ice-T does a pretty good job at, playing, on one hand, sort of the ringleader of the event, but on the other hand, he's not so above, having what he calls a good time, i.e., seeing if he's still, got it in him to kill someone, that kind of thing. And on the other hand, you also have Christopher Lambert, who does a very good job as the genuinely psychotic Lou. And I should say he's also very heavily medicated. Not Christopher Lambert, the character. Lou is heavily medicated. But Lou is a very fascinating character because, on one hand, as much as I love Christopher Lambert, most of the movies I've seen him in, he tends to have, a limited range. But at the same time, though, when he's in a good movie, you tend to like his character that much more, even though his range is rather limited. But, for example, take his performance in Highlander, and then, on the other hand, make it to where his character from that movie is a lot more crazy and genuinely insane. And that's more or less what you have with the character of Lou, albeit without the whole immortality, thing going. But Lou, though, it was definitely the most entertaining character of the bunch. And, there are times where, I found myself kind of rooting for the guy because, Christopher Lambert kind of, tapped into, that Connor McLeod persona, but then threw in, some insanity, which, definitely made for an entertaining combination. So, I mean, the fact that Christopher Lambert was having a good time with the part, I think really helped. And apparently, he was only on set for 2 or 3 days, but the amount of work they got from him was remarkable, because, I mean, he does a really good job in the movie. And, on the other hand, though, I think there are some instances wherein it's a little hard to tell what's going on with his character, as in what his backstory is. And it's not necessarily because of Christopher Lambert, but it's mainly with how, those in charge of filming things, sort of presented things from his perspective. Because you see these flashbacks of his, and in one instance, it looks like, he was on an assignment where he was supposed to kill, someone, and in the process, he accidentally killed a kid along with the people he was supposed to kill, and it's something that really shook him up. But then on the other hand, though, there's this little girl that he brought with him to this event, but he has her stay in, the car that they came in for most of the fight. Basically saying, he'll come back and get her, once he's done. And he's also the only person who showed up of his own free will, because he was looking for for a fun time, as it were. And so, yeah, it's definitely another sign that he's crazy, that he would willingly show up to it. I mean, basically, he didn't really, he wasn't coerced or threatened. He just showed up saying, hey, I'm here for the party, that kind of thing. But the other thing was, with his character, is that while his interactions with, say, the little girl they brought with him, I mean, in some instances they're amusing, and in other instances they're kind of creepy, because there's another flashback that he has where it looks like, he killed her father, but then you find out that that wasn't her father. That was actually someone who was abusing her. And so he killed that guy, apparently, and then, kidnapped the girl. And then you find out something else about his past, where apparently, he had a kid himself, and that kid was killed. And so from what I could figure, it seemed like, on one hand, he had a kid who was, kidnapped and murdered, and at some point in the past, and then, when he was on an assignment, when he accidentally killed, he killed the target he was supposed to, but then in the crossfire he accidentally killed the kid, and then maybe that must have, triggered, his, I guess, desire to, have another kid or something like that, or to protect, or replace the kid that was taken from him or something like that. And so basically, it seems like he was just someone who was kind of a ticking time bomb, because he was, I don't know like how long exactly he was crazy, but, the film, if you can, look at it from a certain perspective, you can have a rough idea of, how things came about, but it takes more than one viewing to do so. And so, as much as I like his character, I think that, those the people who were making the movie, I think they could have, maybe tweaked some things in, the editing department to where it may have been more clear. It could have been more clear as to exactly what was going on with Lou's backstory at certain times. But like I said, that's not necessarily due to Christopher Lambert, though. Like, he actually does a good job playing, a crazy assassin, and his interactions with some of the other characters. I mean, because at some point he forms kind of an alliance with a few of them out of sort of a strength in numbers type of mentality, and his interactions with them are quite amusing in a rather darkly comical sort of way. But there's another point where he has a very good monologue about the nature of madness. And considering the fact that his character is legitimately crazy, it's a very intriguing scene. And it's also one of those moments where Anthony Rapardi's score, really gets that sort of eerie, introspective type of tone to it, which really corresponds with what he's saying and how the other characters are sort of reacting to it, like where they don't really say much or if anything, but they're just kind of letting it sink in. And so basically Christopher Lambert does a really good job as Lou, and he kind of steals the show. On the other hand, though, an actor who isn't as well known is Michael Halsey, but he plays one of the main characters, a guy named Marcus, who is kind of a world-weary mercenary, and he's involved with the Syndicate as well, obviously. But at the same time, though, there are instances where you get the idea that he's kind of what you would call a punch clock villain. Like, he doesn't really take pleasure in doing what the Syndicate orders him to do, because he's killed a lot of people. If his backstory is anything to go by, or what you get from his backstory is anything to go by. But at the same time, he's getting to a point where he does it just out of necessity. Like, he doesn't necessarily take pleasure in it. And so there are instances where, he has every intention of staying alive. He doesn't get into, say, the bloodlust as other characters do. And in fact, there's an instance where he goes out of his way to protect at least one of the characters, but mainly because this particular character doesn't really belong in the fight. And so it's like he kind of has a sort of big brother slash fatherly role of protector for this one particular character. But seeing this type of individual, take a sort of protective stance in the situation, it was definitely interesting to see, because, he obviously has a history with Moon's character, because, there's an instance or two where, the two of them chat, and, Moon even tells him, hey, keep your head down and, watch your ass in there. So obviously, that's one of those instances where, Moon's not, there are certain people that Moon's not actually, wanting to have killed, but because, he's got his orders, he's kind of like, okay, but he doesn't want Marcus to get killed. And so, one of the other things that comes up is that, if the last three people left standing, stand to gain $10 million, which are hidden somewhere within the prison. And so basically that's kind of incentive to try and survive and kill whoever you have to get the money. And so Marcus has some inside knowledge to some extent, but at the same time, when it comes to the bullets flying, he has every intention of doing what he can to survive, and just because he's good friends with Moon, and might have an inkling as to what the Syndicate's real plans are, that doesn't mean he's in any less danger. Although he is the only character other than, say, Moon and his associates, who's allowed to keep his gun, and that's a little tip off that there's more to his character than meets the eye. So Michael Halsey, though, I think in some instances stole the show as well. And granted, Ice-T and Christopher Lambert are the top billed stars, but Michael Halsey, I think, in some ways was just as memorable. And there's also a scene or two where he goes outside of the prison and finds the girl that Lou had kidnapped, and just kind of checks in on her. And so it's kind of interesting seeing his character going from sort of a world-weary cynic to sort of a friendly playful, individual, in the sense that, like, at one instance, when he's checking on the girl out there, he has a teddy bear that was in the car, or he takes a teddy bear that was in the car with the girl and sort of, just, plays with the kid a bit. And then he gets back into, the chaos of, what's going on in the prison. So I like those moments right there, showing that there was, some humanity in his character, and that, basically, while he's got every intention of staying alive, the people who don't need to die, he's trying to make sure, they don't get caught in the crossfire. But yeah, Michael Halsey did a good job, and sadly, he's no longer with us. But this is definitely a movie that I think, he really kicked ass in. But yeah, so another character I liked was Cam, who is one of the few non-criminals who's forced into this event. And it turns out she's actually a reporter, and she's played by Deborah Van Valkenburgh, who was also in Streets of Fire. But she actually does a good job, playing Cam, and she's, someone who, on one hand, is horrified about the situation she's in, but at the same time, there are moments where, she gets caught up in how ridiculous things are. And so there's kind of like this dark sense of humor that comes out, but at the same time, it kind of, goes along with, the horror of the situation. And, she and Marcus actually, form an odd friendship, because she's the one that, Marcus is trying to look out for when he, realizes that she's, not, like, she's not a straight up, criminal like, the rest of them are. But nonetheless, she is a contestant, against her will. And so, the fact that he's trying to look out for her, she tries to, sort of follow his example, and follow his orders as well. And, there are instances where, she finds herself, holding a gun and, trying to follow Marcus's lead. And so she was kind of an interesting contrast to, a lot of the, characters who are, straight up criminal, I guess you could say. And so, Cam was probably one of the few, I guess you could say, morally upright people who, was involved in this situation, albeit against their will. But two of the other scene stealers, I think, were, Crow and Haas. And they were played by, let's see. Okay, so Haas was played by Yuji Okumoto, who was the main bad guy in Cry Kid 2, Chosan, and he was also brought back in the Cobra Kai series. So, seeing him here in Mean Guns was kind of like, yeah, I recognize that guy. And he was pretty much a badass in this role. And Crow was played by Thom Mathews from Return of the Living Dead and Friday the 13th Part 6. He played Tommy Jarvis. And so, basically, the two of them, they make this rather darkly comedic tag team of hitmen. They're obviously best friends, and they work together, if their dialogue's anything to go by, for quite some time. But, they are drawn into the situation, and, on one hand, obviously they don't want to be there, once they find out what's going on. But at the same time, though, I mean, they work well enough together to where, they end up being, some of the, longest running contestants within this game, over this shortened period of time. And, it's amusing watching them, on one hand, going from, say, just casually, doing this little dance number in the elevator at one point, to, later on, they're bludgeoning, some of the other, Syndicate henchmen, at full speed with baseball bats and joking about it. And so, and they're also trying to, one up each other on, who has the most kills and what have you. And so it's a really, funny, listening to their banter, and so in a very strange way, you kind of start to pull for these guys simply because of, their darkly, comedic personas. And Thom Mathews and Yuji Okamoto, they work very well together. And in fact, I kind of wish that we'd gotten another movie with these guys. Because the chemistry that they had with one another, as well as some of the dialogue that they have. I mean, it's obvious that there's a story, to them, that it'd be awesome to have told. But I don't know if anyone's ever taken a shot at that. But yeah, they're definitely some of the scene stealers, though. And but yeah, so there's actually, I mean, quite a few characters here that even if they're only in the movie for a little bit, some of them had certain lines of dialogue that I appreciated. Some of them did good with the short amount of time they were in the movie as far as acting goes. And so that's the main thing here, is just that even though the story itself is pretty simple, it's mostly the presentation, like the way the camera work is done, or the soundtrack, or the actors playing the characters and the dialogue that they have. That's what tends to make the movie stand out. And so while it's definitely a movie that I think could have been improved in terms of, say, editing, namely in, say, trying to figure out certain characters' motivations, namely in the case of Lou, I think that overall, I mean, for a movie that was very low budget, I think that the movie is more memorable and better than it has a right to be. But speaking of low budget, though, I mean, there are supposed to be 100 characters, or 100 syndicate personnel that are kind of herded into this prison facility for this death match. But there are instances where you can tell that there's not 100 people in there. I mean, it's like they try to mess around with the camera work to make it look like there's 100 people, but you can tell it's like not 100 people. But and also, when it comes to, say, like the violence and bloodshed and what have you, I mean, this is a violent movie, but it's not a gory movie. But at the same time, though, considering that people are getting shot to death, or bludgeoned to death, or beaten to death, I mean, you would that in real life, or in most other movies that had a decent budget, there'd be quite a lot of blood being spilled. But I mean, you have some instances where like I said, Crow and Haas, they beat someone to death at with baseball bats, swinging at full speed, and it's like you hear the impact and everything, but yeah, their victims are more or less intact, that kind of thing. Or a couple of the other characters, like they get a hold of shotguns and just go crazy on some of the enemies coming at them. And while you have some good kills, I mean, it's like that the people that they're shooting would just be splattered all over the place. And so if you can bear that in mind, I mean, if you can look past that, I mean, I guess in some ways, depending on your perspective, that kind of adds to the charm of the movie in a strange sort of way. And so but yeah, all in all, though, this was a strange movie, but it's a strange movie that I ended up liking at the end of the day. And I enjoyed seeing the more noteworthy characters gain some time to shine, and the actors that played them did a good job of making them memorable. And I really liked the soundtrack. I liked the combination of the Mambo music going along with Anthony Reparati's more somber score. And I also while I do think that they could have improved things as far as telling exactly what was going on with some of the more I guess you could say hidden agendas that the Syndicate had that are brought up at certain points, but the way they're they feel very rushed, if that makes sense. I think that part could have been improved. But when it comes to, say, just focusing on the characters and them trying to survive, I think that's when the movie shines. And also just when you're getting caught up in all out death match with Mambo music going on, that definitely makes the movie more memorable. I mean, granted, it depends on your tolerance for Mambo, but at the same time, you have to admit that's not something you see every day in most other movies. And so, I'm going to go ahead and give Mean Guns 4 out of 5 stars. This was actually better, upon watching it for, I don't remember how long it's been since I last watched it, but maybe just because of my I guess you could say my love for B movies has gone. I mean, it's gone up since the first time I watched this movie, and so I guess maybe that had something to do with it, or maybe I was able to appreciate certain things about it now that I wasn't back then, if that makes any sense. I mean, I still liked it back then, but now I actually was like, hey, this is actually a cool movie, but yeah, so I am going to go ahead and give the movie 4 out of 5 stars. But I will say, though, that there are unfortunately instances where some of the dialogue is kind of muffled, and the film quality, while it's not terrible, I mean, you could tell that it wasn't, like, say, top notch as far as the picture being pristine or anything like that. In fact, everything sort of has a dreamlike, hazy feel to it and look to it. And in some ways, I think that actually helps the movie, in its surreal quality. And also, it adds to the whole, okay, is there maybe something supernatural going on here? Because there are some instances where, you wonder, because, I mean, case in point, there's an instance where, a security guard, he's checking everyone at the door, and, he sort of has an altercation with someone, like one of the quote-unquote contestants, that's being brought in, and he growls at them, and you see it, the guy, this guard has fangs, and so you're like, what the? And then there's another bit where you hear someone talking over the intercom, and they're actually calling the place purgatory, and you're kind of like, are they actually in purgatory? And then there's another instance I remember where Lou actually manages to make it to the roof at one point, and he looks across the way, at one of the other buildings, and he sees someone, and it looks like this person has, wings, just from a distance, but it's like you see an outline of, wings behind the person. Then he sort of shakes his head and looks again, and it's a Syndicate sniper, taking aim at him, because one of the rules is, basically, the ballpark, as Moon calls it, everyone, they have to stay in the building. If they try to leave, Syndicate snipers will shoot them. And so, that's why, there's a Syndicate sniper taking an aim at Lutz, because, he made it outside. But yeah, so you see stuff like that, and you're wondering, okay, is this Syndicate actually somewhat supernatural in nature? But then, on the other hand, you have that moment where, with Lou seeing what he's seeing, and then you take into account that, he's genuinely psychotic. You're just like, okay, maybe there's something supernatural here, but in his case, he's just seeing shit, that kind of thing. But yeah, but the way everything's filmed, though, like I said, it's very dreamlike and sort of hazy looking. I don't know if that was simply because of, a deliberate choice, or just, the film quality. But that might be something that rubs some people the wrong way. But at the same time, I mean, if you're a lover of B movies, I think that might actually add to your appreciation for it, because it really does feel like you're drawn into this sort of, singular world that Mean Guns, is giving you a glimpse of. But and then the other thing is, this DVD, unfortunately, it doesn't have any English subtitles. Like, it has subtitles in, like, another language or two, but nothing in English. So when the dialogue is muffled, and even if you can't hear everything that's being said when you increase the volume, that can make things somewhat frustrating, though. And thankfully, though, I mean, a lot of the dialogue you can hear it well enough, but there are some instances wherein they're talking about something pertaining to the Syndicate or some of the motivations and what have you. That's where it gets kind of frustrating trying to rewind it and trying to hear what they're saying. And so unfortunately, as far as I know, they haven't come out with anything in the way of, say, a Blu-ray release of this movie, or at the very least a special edition, because sometimes having a Blu-ray release, you get the audio and visual quality spruced up. But as far as I know, I don't know if Mean Guns actually has a Blu-ray release. I haven't been able to find, like, say, any special edition or anything like that. But as far as the DVDs go, just keep that in mind. Some of the audio might be muffled, and so just giving you a heads up on that. But I guess the main thing about this movie is that any problems that I have with it, it's not necessarily so much with the movie itself, but it's more with I guess you could say the technical qualities of the DVD, right? More than anything. But yeah, so that was my take on Mean Guns. Definitely something unique within the realm of B movies. And at the time that this movie was made, this was when Albert Pyun was, he was turning out a lot of movies at this point. In the 90s. And to be sure, there were some noteworthy, films of his that came out at this time. Like there was Dollman, Nemesis, and this one as well. But a lot of the movies were unfortunately declining in quality. And so Mean Guns, I think, was kind of like a last gasp, or it was kind of like that surprise left hook, from a weak fighter, that kind of floors you and reminds you that at one point, hey, this person, had something, because, the movies that came after this Mean Guns, unfortunately, just, were kind of on a downward spiral. There were a few movies that came out here and there that were okay after this point, but Mean Guns, for all intents and purposes, I think was the last straight up worthwhile movie that Albert Pyun made, and I would argue that it was his last good one. And to be fair, there's two other movies of his that I think are legitimately good, and those were Dangerously Close and Cyborg, which were both from the 80s. And there were some other movies he made that were, I would say, legitimately decent, if not straight up good. But Mean Guns, in my opinion, was the last, worthwhile to good movie that he made. But there's quite a large fan base for this movie. And there's actually a comic book company, an independent comic book company. And apparently, they, it's made up of, the people who were making the comic, were huge fans of the movie. And basically, they went out of their way to try and, get some of the stories of the characters, namely of Crow and Haas. And so I definitely want to check those out if I can. I don't know how available they are, but it's nice to know that someone wanted to see the stories of these characters further developed. Now, granted, a lot of these characters end up buying the farm, by the end of the film, but it's nice to know that someone somewhere went out of their way and took the time to, show what the stories of these characters were up until this point, that kind of thing. So I definitely want to check those out if I can. But yeah, Mean Guns, 4 out of 5 stars. That's my take on it. And so if you're into the B-movie scene, definitely check this one out. And especially if you're an Albert Pyun fan, Mean Guns is, probably one of his best, even though it comes at a time when, a lot of his films were starting to go downhill. And so, take that as you will. But thanks for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. You like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. Take care, good night, bye.